Patrick Matthew, 1790 to 1874, used his experience of growing apple and pear trees in his Scottish orchard to write a book in 1831 on naval timber and arboriculture. In an appendix to this work, Matthew recognized that the principles of artificial selection, which he advocated for growing good quality timber for the Navy, could be generalized to natural selection. Unlike Blythe, Matthew didn't see natural selection purely as a stabilizing force preserving the original form of the species. He even went so far as to speculate that the progeny of the same parents under great differences of circumstance might, in several generations, even become distinct species incapable of co-reproduction. When The Origin of Species was first published, Matthew protested at Darwin's failure to cite him, and Darwin punctiliously did so in later editions of his book. The passage that immediately follows the sentence I just quoted seems to bear out Darwin's acknowledgement that Matthew clearly saw the full force of the principle of natural selection. Like Blythe, indeed Darwin seems to have been indebted to Blythe's observations, Matthew saw the importance of overproduction and the consequent struggle for existence. The self-regulating adaptive disposition of organized life may in part be traced to the extreme fecundity of nature, who, as before stated, has in all the varieties of her offspring a prolific power much beyond, in many cases 1,000-fold, what is necessary to fill up the vacancies caused by senile decay. As the field of existence is limited and preoccupied, it is only the hardier, more robust, better suited to circumstance individuals who are able to struggle forward to maturity, these inhabiting only the situations to which they have superior adaptation and greater power of occupancy than any other kind. The weaker, less circumstance-suited, being prematurely destroyed. This principle is in constant action. It regulates the color, the figure, the capacities and instincts. Those individuals of each species whose color and covering are best suited to concealment or protection from enemies, or defense from vicissitude and inclemencies of climate, whose figure is best accommodated to health, strength, defense and support, whose capacities and instincts can best regulate the physical energies to self-advantage according to circumstances, in such immense waste of primary and youthful life, those only come forward to maturity from the strict ordeal by which nature tests their adaptation to her standard of perfection and fitness to continue their kind by reproduction. Well, I'm still left wondering, did Matthew really grasp the immense power of the discovery that he had made? Did he appreciate that natural selection is the answer to the great riddle of existence? Did he see it as the explanation for all of life, the destroyer of the argument from design? If he had, wouldn't he have published it in a more prominent place than the appendix to a manual on naval timber? Wouldn't he have trumpeted it from the rooftops as arguably the most important idea anyone ever had? On the contrary, Matthew seems to have found the idea so obvious, almost trivial, as to need no discovery. In a letter to the Gardener's Chronicle of 12th of May 1860, he wrote, "To me, the conception of this law of nature came intuitively, as a self-evident fact, almost without an effort of concentrated thought. Mr. Darwin seems to have had more merit in the discovery than I have had. To me it did not appear a discovery. He seems to have worked it out by inductive reason, slowly and with due caution to have made his way synthetically from fact to fact onwards, while with me it was by a general glance at the scheme of nature that I estimated this select production of species as an a priori recognizable fact, an axiom requiring only to be pointed out to be admitted by unprejudiced minds of sufficient grasp." With hindsight, we may be tempted to sympathize. But where Huxley, on closing The Origin, movingly said, "How extremely stupid of me not to have thought of that," Matthew's response would seem to have been the Victorian equivalent of "big deal, so what else is new?" Is this the response of a man who 7 years before Darwin and 27 before Wallace found himself in possession of the central, unifying idea that dominates all biology and explains everything about life? As a fair parallel, imagine that a 17th century ancestor of Patrick Matthew saw an apple fall, perhaps in the very same orchard, for the Matthews had been farming in the Carse of Gari since the 16th century. Our earlier Matthew I imagine to have been a physicist, and as he watched his apple fall, he conjectured that the earth exerted an attractive force on apples, pulling them towards it. If this hypothetical horticulturalist had later written to Isaac Newton and indignantly claimed priority for the theory of gravitation, Newton, a less generous man than Darwin, would rightly have given him short shrift. The physicist Matthew, let's suppose, confined his theory to apples, or at best to objects falling towards the earth. He lacked Newton's grand vision of the same force acting throughout the universe, responsible for the elliptical orbits of the planets, for the stars in their courses, ultimately for the very structure of the universe itself.